Hello and welcome to the Wisden Cricket Weekly podcast. We've got a fascinating chat with Keaton Jennings coming up in today's show. There's also some discussion on the start of the IPL, England's tour of New Zealand, some typically chaotic developments in Pakistan, and a whole lot more. I'm Rana, and with me today are Gardner and Katya Witney. But first, let's hear the chat that Phil Walker and I had with Jennings on his winter with the England Lions, his own superb recent form, perspective in cricket, and some chat on how the county game has changed over the last few years. We've got a special guest this week in Keaton Jennings. Keaton, great to have you on the show. Have you wintered well?
Cheers, yes. Yeah, it's been an interesting winter. Been to India a couple of times, spent a bit of time in the indoors, so it's been an interesting winter, but hopefully a successful one moving into the season in a couple of weeks. So it'll be good, man.
How was that Lions tour? 3 first-class games against a strong India A side. A lot of those guys ended up playing in the Test series against England. You got some big runs in that first game. How did you reflect on that tour?
Yeah, to be honest, it was. I mean, it's quite a bit to unpack. I mean, the whole tour was tough. It was some tough cricket, like you said. A lot of those guys ended up playing against the sort of main squad the week later and did really well. So I mean, the quality of opposition was good. Quite intense tour. We spent sort of 3.5, 4 weeks in the same hotel, same room. There's not a whole heap to do in Ahmedabad. So we spent, of the 32 days, whatever it was, I think about 26 days at the ground. So it was a fairly heavy tour in terms of you go in, you train, you get out. There wasn't a whole heap of variety, put it that way. But a really successful tour. I mean, I got to know quite a few of the guys. There was a nice blend. I definitely felt like one of the older heads. There was probably 3 or 4 of us that were significantly older than the other crop. But I mean, some fantastic lads. It's really interesting lads with a whole heap of interest outside of cricket, which was really cool to see.
Who are some of the guys with those external cricket interests, out of interest?
Casey Aldridge. Obviously, you play against lads and you have a perception of who they are, what they are, but you play against the guy and he's a bowler and you kind of take it at face value. He seems a nice lad and you move on. But when you spend weeks on end in the same hotel playing card games with each other, you really get to know each other. And he's an impressive young man, started his own business, turned it into a really successful business, and he's doing nicely. So he's one of a couple of guys. I mean, Pricey, he got 1 or 2 degrees, spent time in Argentina teaching cricket, spent time in France living there. He did a languages degree, I think. So you got some really impressive lads that have some really keen interests outside of cricket, which is quite cool. So it made for conversation outside of cricket, which is
nice. Talk to us about Matt Potts. He had a really, really good tour. Obviously, England fans would have seen him have a very impressive start to his Test career now 2 years ago. But seeing him up close and doing so well out there in India, what did you make of his tour?
You know what? Potts was brilliant. He ran in. I've never seen a bloke. It was hot. It was really hot. To the point where you almost feel like the air doesn't move in that massive stadium or Coliseum, whatever you want to call it in Ahmedabad. It's seats just keep going back. I mean, it's hard to describe the feeling when you stand in the field. It's almost like a concrete tunnel. And there's just seats all the way back for miles. So there's no air. The air doesn't sort of circulate around it, so it becomes really hot. And the bloke just ran in. And when he should have stopped, he ran in some more. 2 days later, he did exactly the same thing. So it was really impressive. And the skill quality of what he delivered was impressive. Good pace, good skills, got the ball to reverse. It was really impressive what he produced, but outside of English conditions. So I think at times, you can run in, temperature's nice and it's okay to run in for the whole day. But there it's sapping. I mean, bounces. It was really cool how we made things happen.
And you were saying as well that it was properly hot out there as well. It wasn't like 22 degrees. It was like 32 degrees.
It was 32, 33. It was warm. It was really hot. It wasn't and like I said, it almost feels worse when there's no air. So if you're out in an open field, sometimes the air circulates and it feels right. But when there's no air circulation, it just feels like it sits on top of you. So, yeah, I mean, the boys put in a hell of an effort. And he bowled overs. He trucked in. It wasn't a case of sort of 3 spells of 4 in the day and I'll see you boys later. He trucked in. He bowled 22, 23 overs a day and at high pace, which was awesome. Him and Kasi were outstanding.
And there's a bit of a role reversal with you and Josh Bohannon. You skipper Josh at Lancs, and he took charge of the tour. A lot of people will be aware of Josh and his work over the last couple of years. He scored so many runs for Lancashire. For people who haven't actually seen much of him play, what does he do particularly well?
Look, I suppose firstly, for me, it was brilliant to give Boshy a few headaches on the field. He's given me a few in the past, so it was nice to give him a couple. Um, I think Boshy's keen, or Boshy's big strength is he's very clear with how he wants to do things. He's very committed. So when he goes about his work, he's team first, and he commits to that process. So what the situation calls of him, he goes and does it. Second innings of that first game, we're trying to push the game forward. And I think on North, he tried to sort of slash one, got caught. But for him, it was about pushing the game forward, which is amazing. And then you package in a lad that can move incredibly quickly. He's a high quality athlete. And then as a batter, obviously, his game has moved forward significantly, especially against spin. And he knows his options, and he's executed brilliantly. I mean, you don't get that sort of quantity of runs over a period of 3-4 years. Well, I think he's averaging 46 or 47 in first class cricket, by not being a high quality batter.
His strike rate, Keaton, just looking at Josh, has skyrocketed in the last 12 months or so. It's gone from something like 40 odd to about 70 odd. Now, that could just be his evolution as a player, or it could also be a reflection of perhaps the way that county cricketers who are on the cusp of that England side are starting to think about their own games. And I guess there's an element of that reflected in you and your own story as well. And while county cricketers want to have their own way of doing things, and they're very proud of that, and I get that, quite protective of it, nonetheless, what's happening at the test level can't fail to have some kind of knock-on effect, right?
Absolutely. And it's probably slightly more to unpack there. So I think it's probably firstly, you as a player, you want to play international cricket, you want to play test cricket, you want to play at the highest level you can, because that's your ambition. You want to evolve, like you said, that evolution of a player. I think Boshy's done that brilliantly. He's given himself more options. Obviously, that eye on international cricket. And then I think a third bit to that is probably the way we've tried to play at OT. To try and force a result at OT has been quite hard work. So we've almost gone to the point where if you do get on top of the game, let's try and move the game forward. So that's where his strike rate's probably bumped up an extra 5%, 10%, 20% with all those things together. So, and he's done it brilliantly. He's taken the right options, and puts you under pressure. You watch him in the nets, and he puts boys under pressure, which is really cool to see.
And with yourself, has there been, if you compare yourself, say, to Keaton Jennings Mark 1 to Keaton Jennings Mark 2, is the main difference a greater emphasis on taking the game forward in your own story?
Mark 1 being 10 years ago, or Mark 1 being 3 years ago? Because I think for me, 10 years ago,
perhaps the hinge point is when you went to Lancs, and when you had that particularly monstrous year, and you'd been out of the England side for a year or two, and you really became a kind of a heavy county figure, and you've spoken to me about one or two sort of technical changes that you made, but was there also a mindset element with you as well?
Yeah, 100%. I think probably my biggest shift, I've almost tried to look at my cricket very objectively. So for me, it's been about player A. I look at technique as very objectively. What can I change? What can I develop? Where I almost took it quite personally before. It was like, no, this is my technique. This is what I need to try and do. I don't want to say rigid in my thinking, but I was quite defensive in my thinking. Last few years, I've almost thrown that away. How can I improve every day? There's little bits. I don't take it personally. I just try and sort of add one or two bits to it. And then probably coupled to that, I think as a young player at times, you feel like you're under threat. And I probably felt that in my batting. I probably didn't enjoy batting because I felt like every ball was a threat, if that makes sense. Where now you're going to get out. I think when you make peace with the fact you are going to get out, you try and score some runs in between that, and you have a sort of explore around the options that are good for you or aren't good for you. I was almost too perfectionistic beforehand to try and don't make an error. Where now I'm accepting that I'm going to make an error, so let's try and get some runs before you actually do make an error.
That's quite a big change in mindset. Was there a particular moment that saw the change, or was that like a gradual evolution over time?
I don't think there's a specific moment. I think for me, doing my MBA was quite a big evolution in that. I think when the amount of reading, the amount of sort of work I had away from the game almost drew me out of my own head, and out of viewing myself as a player. I almost went, right, there's my cricket, that's my professional life, and I'm also a human being alongside that. So for me, I could be really critical with myself without being taking it personally, like I said. But I'd say that doing that MBA for me was the moment where I started viewing it quite critically, not in a bad way, but just you view your own game in a critical sense. You go, well, how can I improve it? Are these areas good? Are they bad? Did I try my best? Did I not? And you start packaging together your play. I wish I'd actually sort of viewed that earlier. I think when you look at quite a lot of the good players, they almost do that subconsciously a lot earlier in their career. Is that a bad thing? No, that's just kind of my journey and the way I've kind of ended up developing.
Talk us through the MBA, because that is not a normal thing for a county player to do.
No, look, it was, to be entirely honest, 2019, I kind of got the shits of cricket. Also, I kind of got
you're allowed to swear. All good.
Yeah, I kind of got the shits of cricket. I ended up, I got a bad decision. I remember the moment, actually. It was, we played Durham at Sedba, second innings, played and missed it one. We'd given our call behind first ball, missed it by a foot off Rashi. I remember sitting in the changing room, I'm sick of this. I wasn't going to retire, but I thought, I'm pouring in so much energy into this and I'm not getting any return. So I thought, right, I'm going to finish my degree. So I finished my degree from that September until the next sort of June. But in the meantime, COVID had hit. And I just thought, well, I'm studying, COVID's hit, let me just sign up for an MBA. I want to go into business or the admin side of sport, post-cricket. So let me just do it. And I look back, it's probably the best decision I made. It was 2 years of really hard work. But it was 2 years where I learned a whole heap about business, how relevant or practical it is. I have no idea. But for me, it was about getting my foot into the door potentially for an interview post-cricket. Try and set myself up and go from there.
Nice. I'm not sure if Cricket Info has a pre-MBA, post-MBA filter on Stats Guru, but I was looking at your numbers. You average pretty much exactly 60 over your last 25 first-class games, and opening in England that is no mean feat. Moving on to your job at Lancs, the IPL started the other day, and two Lancs players are involved, Phil Salt and Luke Wood. They're not just involved, they were very late pickups for their respective franchises. Obviously, you must be really happy for them playing out there, but as a captain who's got 7 games of championship cricket in the next couple of months, how disruptive is that to your pre-season planning?
Yeah, it's been incredibly challenging. I suppose first, you look at guys like Salty, Woody that weren't picked up, and they're two really big figures in our change room. They're two really good human beings, and you feel nothing but happiness for the lads. You want them to go and play and do well. I mean, you're playing on the biggest stage in the world. You're playing on a $7.5 billion US valued tournament. Like it's incredible, the opportunity and the chance to go and play, go and do your thing. It's amazing. It is incredibly hard to try and package a squad around that. Guys get pulled in and out, and suddenly you lose guys. We could lose guys for the whole season with the World Cup being around. You don't want to come back from nearly 3 months in India, have 2 weeks off, and then go into a World Cup. So they're not going to play in that period if you do get picked in the World Cup squad. So to try and package your squad around it is quite hard work. I mean, at one point I think we had 11 fit cricketers on our preseason tour. So it was like you kind of looking around the group with an average age of, without Stephen Croft, I think the average age was about 22. But look, it's amazing. I think the one thing our squad does have, we've got a huge, diverse sort of range of where guys are in their career. You got guys playing IPL. You got guys that haven't played a professional game of cricket, but you can see within them they're really keen to learn. You got everything in between as well. You got Wellesley, myself, who are experienced. I don't want to say old, but experienced. And then you got young Boshi, who looks about 45 but still has 15 years of playing left. So it's a nice blend.
One of those guys who was fit on your tour of the UAE was Saqib Mahmood. Saqib Mahmood's obviously not played a lot of cricket recently. How excited are you about Saqib's return to first team cricket?
Oh, massive. It's like he's in the same way Woody and Salt, he's a huge figure within our change room. He's got high quality skills, as we've seen when he's played. Unfortunately, the last couple of years, he's got a couple of back fractures, it's so hard to try and stop. I mean, you see the amount of work guys have done over the winter, and you can go and bowl your first 2 weeks, and suddenly your back just sort of gives way, which is tough. So it's been a very careful, gradual process building him back up, making sure, well, I suppose the medical team get it right to make sure that the guy's in the best place. I mean, there's a duty of care to make sure that post cricket as well, he's safe. You're not sort of ruining a guy physically. So it's a nice gradual process, and hopefully we can get him back on the park soon, because he's a huge asset, man. He's an amazing player.
I was just wondering on Saqib. Obviously, it's a bit premature to say now, but do you think that we will see him in 4-day cricket at some point in the next 2-month period? When obviously we're playing basically every week. Do you expect him to be physically in a position where you can run him out in a 4-dayer?
I don't want to say I expect to. I think I would love to. I think there's every chance we will. But I'd love to see him out there. I think when you look at his skills, especially at OT, he can swing the ball when it's still fairly new. He can get it to reverse. He's got a lovely action to get the ball to sort of go quite late. I don't want to say expect, because with these sort of back fractures, I'm no medical expert, but if there's any sort of feeling of it coming back, you do get knocked back significant time periods. So I'd love to see him play, and it'd be a huge addition for us when he does. So cross fingers, and let's hopefully he's fit as soon as he can be.
Can I just ask you as well, Keaton, going back a little to what you were saying earlier regarding, if you like, your lowest point with the game, when you missed one from Rashid by a foot and you're given out and so on, and you were wondering where you were with the game. Having that kind of experience, and you've had great highs and lows with the game, like most people have who've hung around for the best part of 12 years or so as a pro. As a skipper, you must be leaning on these experiences all the time, right? And do you have to almost have an antenna for players under your charge who are perhaps quietly, silently struggling, not just with their own games, but obviously the knock-on effect, how they're feeling about themselves? And cricket being such a challenging game psychologically, a game of failure, as we say, you must be acutely aware of that, right, as a skipper. And if anything, it's a 24/7 job, right? Because there's 24, 25 lads under your charge who can be in any number of different positions at the time.
100%. And I think you've hit the nail on the head. You have to. I don't want to say it's only a captain's job. I think as a senior player, as a senior lad within the squad, that's your responsibility. It probably ultimately falls on my shoulders, but it's your responsibility to look at guys' eyes in the morning, to realize where they are in their career, like you say, where they are from the previous day, and then it's your job to try and either burst that bubble. So as a young player, you'll cocoon yourself in a little bubble of self-pity, whatever it is, or an incredible high. And it's, in my opinion, is to burst that little bubble of that player, to try and keep them nice and level, keep them with a good perspective. Because if you can influence how that person feels on that day, whether it's conversation, a coffee, kind of a beer, whatever it is, you can pull that person out of a bad run quicker. Maybe you can't. Maybe he's got to go through that process. But it's a massive sort of responsibility of the senior players to make sure you see where guys are. So I think as a batter, you sort of peak at 28, 29. I think if you can help a younger lad to peak at 26, and then if he can help the next sort of lad underneath him to peak at 24, suddenly you've got a squad or a generation of players that are at their best at 24 with 15 years ahead of them rather than 10.
Can I also just ask briefly, dressing room culture in male cricket has changed, and I think we all know that. But do some of the old world scraps, arguments, and so do they still take place? I wonder, or is it now, almost sort of structurally progressive and so on, right? Or is there still an echo of, say, your old man Ray would have been, grew up playing in South Africa and so on? You can imagine it would have been a different kind of vibe in those dressing rooms. Are we completely lost on that era now, or is there still an element of it? Because it's still, blokes going up against one another, right?
It's definitely not entirely lost. I think it has progressed significantly. It is I don't want to say a lot nicer, but it's definitely
But
a
it's a
lot
lot
more.
nicer.
But it's a lot nicer. But I mean, as an example, we played a game in Northants last year. I think it was the start of last year. I got a bad decision. Wellesley got a bad decision. Somebody else got a bad decision. And me and Wellesley ended up locking horns in the change room. And he's one of my really close mates. So there's definitely still those busts up in change rooms. But in a way, they're almost, you come out better on the other side when they do happen, because I think because things have progressed, guys are slightly more thoughtful in the way they approach things and maybe more honest, but it takes time to get there. That when you do have a bit of a bust up, guys come out a little bit closer on the other side.
Nice.
But no, it's definitely not entirely lost. I can promise you that.
That's kind of a relief, really. I think that's a good thing. That's a healthy thing, I think.
More generally, you've been involved in the county game now for 10 years plus. How much has the life of a county player changed? How has the lifestyle changed much? Has it become much more professional than it was 10 or so years ago?
Personally, I think it's become really professional. I think the way the guys train at Lancs is incredible. They're in 5 days a week. It's like 4 or 5 hours. The boys work really hard. I remember training fairly hard at the start of my career, but I don't feel like it was this intense. I feel like the quality of cricket has definitely improved. When I look at sort of how we used to prep for games 10 years ago in comparison to now, I feel like there's a lot more detail involved. There's a lot more attention to detail. For whatever reason, the season feels more manic. I know we played more days of cricket 10 years ago, but with 16 first class or 17 first class games, probably more T20s, but it feels more manic now. And I don't know why, whether that's quality of cricket, whether it's timing, whatever it is. I know we're probably getting into a different discussion there, but it feels more intense. But I think as a whole, the game's progressed nicely. The game's moved forward. You watch how far guys are hitting the ball. You watch the intensity guys are playing with. I mean, Jaiswal hitting Tommy's first ball out the ground. You guys are doing so much prep beforehand to make sure that every ball is of the best quality that they can produce. So it's really cool where the game's moved forward. So I think.
I guess why I'm asking that is, you hear ex-pros who are not long retired talking about a culture that is quite far away from what you'd imagine a professional sporting culture being. I mean, was it when you started your career, not naming names or teams or anything like that, was there a much more was there a boozier culture in county cricket 10 years ago compared to how it is today?
I mean, I haven't played in change rooms where guys would go out and get boozed every night. It hasn't. I mean, I played with my head coach Benki, and he would sit with Diva, Michael Divinito. They would sit and chew the fat in the bar for hours, but it never felt like they would go out and party until 2-3 o'clock in the morning. They would go home, prep, and Benki would probably roll out 100 the next day, or Diva would. But it almost feels like that's started to taper off. Guys are making sure the recovery is better. So the game's definitely, I think it's probably a societal thing as well. I mean, you look at like how the Six Nations is marketed, it's Guinness Zero. Or I saw at the Formula One over the weekend, it's Heineken Zero. So there's definitely a cultural shift away from alcohol. I don't drink during games anymore, purely because I had one side of the day after I got 100 and tore my hammy for 12 weeks. So but then you look at it as a player going, well, if I don't do this, I'm going to not play cricket because you're going to keep getting injured. So the game's definitely moved forward. How healthy it is, I'm not entirely sure. I learned a lot of my cricket sitting with Diva and Benki, just listening. You learn so much about the game, just sitting there discussing it, discussing tactics, discussing whatever it is, and then you go and try and do it the next day. So I think there still has to be a platform. It doesn't have to be in the bar. It doesn't have to be alcohol, but there still has to be a platform for guys to socially go and engage and learn, in my opinion.
No, that's really interesting. And on the schedule, we had Daniel Bell-Drummond on the pod last week, and he was talking about the schedule. There are some, I'm not sure if this affects Lancs, but there are some turnarounds where counties are playing Friday night T20 games, and then they're playing a different venue Saturday afternoon. And he talked about once last season facing Tamar Mills under lights, and he said he was basically half asleep, and he talked about how that's dangerous. We talk about what's good from a welfare perspective, and that's more maybe mental well-being, but he was talking very physically, actually, facing Mills 90 miles per hour when you're not 100% on it is dangerous. How do you feel about the way that the season is structured? As you say, it's probably not quite as many days of cricket as it was 10, 15 years ago, but a lot of players talk about how intense it is these days.
I mean, to give you some sort of idea, we arrived back from India on Friday night. We were 6:30 flight, I think we landed in. So I was up this morning at just after 5, still fairly jet lagged, 5.5 hours worth of jet lag or time zone difference to overcome. We start tomorrow morning at 11 o'clock. So drive down to Loughborough tonight, you play 3 days of cricket. So there, from an injury point of view, you're probably at risk already because you haven't kind of got over the jet lag. During the season, I mean, I echo what DVD said. I think we played a day-night game somewhere, and then we played the curtain raiser for a double header at OT. So again, a couple of years ago, we were less than 12 hours from arriving home to being on deck the next day. So it's hectic. And you can't produce 100% under that sort of pressure because you've traveled, your mental sort of state is all over the place. I mean, you're pulling on shirts that you haven't washed for 3 or 4 days. And you're just not at your freshest. But yeah, I'd rather DVD face Millsy under lights day after playing somewhere else. So I'm glad he can deal with that, not me.
And do you guys, is this something you talk about in the dressing room? Is there another way in which you think that or players might think the county season might be structured in a different way that is less hectic?
Look, I suppose everybody's got their own opinion, and that'll come from their position. That'll change. Even 4 or 5 times within our dressing room, PCA came around pre-season before we went on a pre-season tour, and we sort of discussed what their members would like. And even within our group, we had 4, 5, 6, 7 different varying ideas or ideologies based on essentially where guys' interests are. If guys are predominantly white ball cricketers, red ball cricketers, if they play all formats, whatever it is. To a degree, for me, it comes down to this is the schedule, what it is now. You can win, you can be tired, you can do whatever you want, but essentially everybody's in the same boat. So how you deal with it, how you put yourself in the best space, how you recover, go and have a beer if you need to mentally go and chill out. Go to bed at 7 p.m. if you need a 12-hour kip. For me, you've got to make sure you're in the best place. And it's not about creating excuses. This is the schedule as it stands now. So be the best at it to come out on top.
One of the statement signings of the 2024 summer is Lanc signing Nathan Lyon. Pretty handy getting a guy with 500 plus test wickets in. How do signings like that work? Like, is that do you identify that you want to use an overseas slot on that type of player, or is it, do you hear whisperings that Lyon might be available and then that changes your plan? And as captain, are you involved with that, or is that director of cricket conversations?
That's predominantly director of cricket. I've got an input. But the majority of the legwork is Mark Chilton. He's brilliant at it. He communicates really nice. He sort of communicates who he's looking at, who he's not looking at. And then it's for me to give input. But I suppose for me, you look at your squad where everybody is and what you need. If you've got a couple of fast bowlers down, you'd obviously look at a fast bowler. If your pack of batters is quite young, you look at a batter. Or if you've got somebody like Nath where the quality of what you're getting, like you say, is over 500 test polls, regardless of what you've got, that's always going to bring value. So, yeah, look, it's brilliant. Looking forward to him getting in, what are we now? Monday next week, I think. So it'd be brilliant to have him in and around, and hopefully we can get the ball to turn at OT and he can win some games there and sort of get in amongst it, which would be good.
So that's the follow-up question, obviously.
Yep.
you know what's coming.
Absolutely, go on.
Yeah, so you do have a lad coming up through your ranks who's only played maybe 20 on first-class games, but he happened to take 7 for on his Test match debut, and suddenly we're thinking, we might have a player here, but how does he play in English county cricket when you have an all-timer at one end? Are we reverting back to the days of playing 2 spinners, Keaton? And indeed, do you dare? Do you dare as a captain? Is it even possible, really, to play 2 spinners? And the corollary, if you don't, where's Tom going to play this year?
You know what? I would love to scarify the ends of it, leave the grass in the middle about 25 mil, keep Bales and Will happy, Scarify the ends, keep Nate happy and keep Tommy happy.
You wouldn't
I'm not
be.
Sure
I'm not sure you would be.
I'm all for it. At some point, we'll get a result at OT, so it'll be brilliant. No, you know, it's. I think even if Tommy had to miss out, I think the reality of the situation is it's April. We're in the UK. If it's not going to turn as much, you've got arguably the best off spinner the game's seen. Tommy's going to learn a huge amount from that guy. And Tommy's going to play a huge part in Lance's sort of cricketing history. You see the quality he's produced on that Test match debut. He arguably won England the game with him and Popey. So it's amazing as a bloke to look and see Tommy do really well. Puts me in a really tough situation, myself and Banks in a really tough situation for next week. But like I say, you when we made the signing, I think it was August or September, when you make the signing, you can't foresee what's going to happen in 6 months' time. You've got such high quality available. You try and make the best decision you can. But yeah, look, I mean, I'll hopefully hold Tommy to his words over the interview you did. I think it was back end of the India series. So look, pick his brain and see where we go. But Tommy's a fantastic kid. I mean, his work ethic is second to none. He grafts away, he catches, he bats, he bowls. He doesn't sort of moan on. I mean, there's not a bad word to say about him. So, yeah.
And watching success in India, he looks like someone who's really up for the fight.
Absolutely. He gets stuck in. He doesn't shy away from it, even when things haven't gone well. There's no trying to hide himself. He just gets stuck in. There's been roles. He batted ahead of Livy in some of the T20s as well. He literally just threw himself into every situation that he's been in. He bowls the tough overs in T20s. He bowls at OT on some pretty flat wickets and just wants to keep doing it. There's no shying away from any challenge. So, look, I think there's ways you can frame opportunity or threat. This isn't a threat. You've got a guy with 500 test polls to learn from him. I look at sort of the start of my career. We had Diver, Benke, Rocky, Mark Stone, and you had some high quality players. I know I hadn't made my test match debut at that point, but for me, it was you just learn as much as you can, see what you can get out of it, and at the end of the year, when Nathan's in chair, Tommy goes, I'm hopefully the number one spinner in the country, and I'm going to bowl every over I can. Cool.
So we got a couple of listener questions, and then a question that we talked about last week. I'll be quite interested to hear your thoughts on. One question is, why don't you bowl as much anymore?
I think Sam Byrne, our 6'5" Australian physio, would rip my legs off and hit me with a wet end if I bowled again. 3 seasons ago, I blew through my calf. I did tendon, muscle belly. I did everything. And then last season, I did quite a bad tear through my hammy. Again, tendon, split the middle of it. I had a 20 centimeter tear in my hamstring. So I think when you look at a player's impact on the squad, if you remove a player, what's the impact on the squad? A guy like Baldy would then have to go and open the batting. That then takes away from his bowling. He's then opening the batting after 20 overs in the dirt. So everybody gets knocked on. Essentially, my job is to open the batting and do that properly. I'm not going to play a huge role with the ball. I might bowl a little bit. But yeah, it's more to try and extend my career and try and hopefully have a more positive impact on the squad.
13 wickets at 19. The last time you bowled more than 25 overs in a season.
Yeah. I know you don't need to remind me. I think Wellesley was probably one of them. So and Salty, to be fair. So yeah, I'll try and remind him of that.
And also, players in the county game who people like me and Phil don't talk about, who are really good and people following the game should keep an eye on this summer.
Good question. There's probably a couple. Pricey from Gloucester, really impressive kid, works incredibly hard. I suppose there's a lumping pressure on a guy that will overthink and will sort of work really hard at his game. But I love the way he goes about things. I think he's got the attributes of being an impressive player. Tommy Laws from Surrey, again, really talented. He can bat as well. So you look at an all-rounder, he bowls some impressive balls, he bats. So yeah, I'd probably say those two guys that I've played with and enjoyed some time with, that I look at them and you just think there's some quality about what these guys are going to produce.
And we spent 5 or so minutes talking about this on last week's show. We had a question on how can the county championship become more friendly as a viewership experience for younger people. I guess your perspective would be quite interesting because Lancs have sort of led the way with streaming over the last few years, a really professional looking product. What do you think? Because, as someone myself who has always liked and watched the championship, it's really high quality cricket. It's really not that far off Test cricket. Overseas players say that. So there almost theoretically should be more people watching it and really interested in it. Yeah. What do you think that the tournament can do to become more popular among a younger audience?
It's probably twofold for me. When I look at what, say, the IPL do around their squad, how they engage with their sort of fan base, you get so much inside content on the stories of players. People can feel so close to those players. I know they have entirely different budgets, but for me, it's the point of how can we get people into the change room? How can we? That's probably more business view than a player view. But if you know George Bell and you know what he's like, you've seen him in the morning, you've seen how he preps, you're going to be more attached to that team. I mean, England rugby did it beautifully around the Six Nations. Like, how many eggs did they have? How many cups of coffee did they make? There was so much good, clean content of what the lads are like that I think will draw you to that team. Probably a first thing. And then a second thing, I think those situations where a lot of sides may go for the draw, I think for me, that playing to win element that Stokesy and Baz have been so good with, I think will create quite a lot of excitement for people to actually want to watch a result-driven game, not necessarily with a green surface on a good cricket wicket, but playing to win and almost risking the element of loss. So I think it's probably twofold for me, how you attach to the players and then playing to, I know everybody plays to win, but when your back's up against the wall, can you still find a way to win, which I think Stokes and Baz have done brilliantly.
Could I just go back to that, the first part of that answer, Keaton? And Lancashire as a club conscious of that then? And the idea of making players more accessible, is that something that the club are consciously driving to try and get to that point? And have the players signed up to it as well, I guess?
So that's probably two parts. I think the first part, yes, I think they are. You've seen the investment we've had in our sort of streaming. We have a nice sound with JO. So there's a 24-hour stream going on in India. So I think they will start doing more content around what players are like. I don't want to give away too many secrets. I don't know what the guys are going to produce from a marketing point of view, but I know they're looking at the consumer experience of coming to OT. How close can you get to the players? There's PMOA, there's all sorts of restrictions around it. But how close can you get people to the player? How close can you get people to experiencing what it's like on a match day within the change room? All that sort of thing. So they're very aware of it. It's, I suppose, a work in progress. Are players attached to it? Yes. But I think that there would be a hesitation of how it affects your performance.
Yeah.
So on a match day, how much time does it take from you? What does it to detract from your performance? So how much of that content can be done the day before? How much of it can be really subtle in and around the change room? I don't know. But I'd say that's maybe where the hesitation is. I think you watch some like documentaries. I don't know if you watched the one on the Six Nations, but it's some of the stuff in the change room almost seems scripted, which for me takes away from it entirely. You want to just have it raw. You want to have guys. I remember I've forgotten his name now. Played a game against Lancs, not captain, Dan Christian, a couple of years ago, and he sprayed the lads in the change room because they lost the game they shouldn't have. And that for me is what makes it so engaging, because it's like it's so raw, and you don't want it to become scripted.
Okay, but as a captain, would you be up for cameras being in the OT dressing room for this summer, for example?
I'd probably ask some questions around it, but there wouldn't be a hard no. There'd be a lot of other questions. Or when are we going to have it on? When are we? What's the image rights around it? What's the kickback for the players? What's the financial incentive? What's everything around it? How are we going to use that footage? But for me, it wouldn't be a hard no. I think for me, you have to connect your 5-year-old, 6-year-old, 7-year-old kid wanting to come into the game with Jimmy, with whoever's playing, Joss, whether it's live stream in the chain, whatever it is, there's got to be something that you can connect those people with. But yeah, I mean, for me, it wouldn't be a hard no. I'll just ask some questions around it.
You're going to be a sports administrator when you retire, aren't you? You're going to run the ICC, or maybe the ECB first. But it's interesting. We've kept going back to this. You mentioned the value of the IPL, for example. Now not many players would have that understanding of the scale of the thing. And you talk in a broad term about county cricket and the role it has to play. So obviously, with your degree as well, this is where your mind is, right? With regards to the game, you don't just care about it because you play it. You care about its future and how all its dysfunctional parts fit together.
100%. I think the dysfunctional parts for me almost create the value, because I think you don't fix it, but you twist it in such a way that it can look good, or it can be beneficial to you. So I think, yes, it's not ideal. It's not ideal that we start a game on a Friday and you end it on a Monday. But how can you get people into the ground? How can you make it more accessible? What can the touch points around the game look like? I mean, I love the game. You grow up as a kid playing in the back garden. I mean, I remember literally trying to keep the ball away from Silly Point. There was a window in my best mate's back garden. We broke it a few times. Granted, we took a few bollockings for it, but that's you don't want that game to die. That love of the game has got to keep growing for me, and you only do that by growing it and understanding. Essentially, comes down to money. Bottom line for me, it comes down to how financially viable it is. So, how can you grow it? How can you get people entertained, and how can you, whether it's sponsorship, new revenue streams, whatever it is, how can you get people involved in it?
I thought it was really interesting that you talked about the accessibility, and I think that's each sport has its own sort of culture with access. So I occasionally watch Formula One, and I am blown away by the access there is. Blokes are driving at 200 miles per hour, and 10 minutes before they've got a microphone in their face and that sort of stuff. And I do think with the county championship in particular, there are so many opportunities there because, literally guys aren't actually doing that much a lot of the day. If you're waiting to bat, or if you're a bowler and your team just starts to bat, for example, you might not be in action for a long time. It feels like there are a lot of opportunities there that almost needs a culture shift to sort of make the most of, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. I mean, we Red Bull and Stokesy took us to the Abu Dhabi Grand Prix before the Pakistan series 18 months ago.
Yeah.
And man, it was qualifying. The guys are going to go out and race in millions and millions and millions of pounds worth of racing, and I'm literally stood in the pit stop half an hour before they're going out, and the mechanic's got his leg in between my leg, working on the bottom of the car. I'm just thinking, I don't need to be here. I shouldn't be here right now. But there's no oh man, you need to get out of here. It was just say, yeah, cool, no worries, yeah, just to go in the car. It was just so normal. So like you said, there's a huge opportunity to get people in and around. And look, I know nobody can just come off the street and just walk into the Red Bull sort of pit. That doesn't work like that. But it's the point is that people are there, so the access is there. So for me, there's a massive shift that could happen in cricket. I mean, the guys were talking at the time, it'd be like Jimmy tying his shoes, and you've just got a bloke just stood in front of him going, I don't matter, you're right. The bloke's going to go bowl in the test match in 20 minutes, but that's the access he's got.
Yeah.
Yes, do you fancy a 4-day long live podcast from the Old Trafford dressing room for the first home
game? Let's do it. I've always wondered what the cricket equivalent to the Martin Brundle F1 pit walk interview thing would be. I'm not sure it'd translate as well for the first county championship game of the season, but I think there's something in there. Anyway, I think we've taken enough of your time, Keaton. Thanks so much for joining us, and best of luck with the start of the season.
Cheers, guys. Cheers, Phil. Thank you, guys.
England are 2-1 up after 3 games in a 5-match T20I series in New Zealand. Heather Knight scored back-to-back 50s in the first 2 games as England went 2-0 up. In the third game, New Zealand had their WPL stars back, but England did not, and England lost following a spectacular collapse. At one point, England needed 29 off 29 with 8 wickets in hand and somehow lost. Maye Bouchier scored a brilliant 71, got England off to a flyer early on, and that would have been the story of the game from an England point of view were it not for that collapse. Katya, I know England are missing important players, but still that batting has been a concern this series, even in the 2 victories. Knights, 50s in good form, sort of papering over the cracks.
Yeah, I think it kind of builds on an issue that's been bubbling away for a while for England, which is, as you said, without Knights' innings in both of those first 2 matches, England would have been in quite a bit of trouble and possibly would have been looking at losing those matches, especially the second. So Knight scored 53 in the second game, and the highest score after that was 19, which Tammy Beaumont scored. And it's something that we've talked a little bit about on the show before, that England are missing quite a lot of their core players for the first three matches of this series after the WPL. So Danny Wyatt, Nat Silverbrand, Alice Capsey and Sophie Eccleston have all been unavailable for the first 3 games. And that's created this space where a lot of, if you want to call them bench players, are being tested, players that wouldn't normally get in the first choice 11 or might be rotated in and out of the first choice 11. And they've looked pretty shaky. The exception to that, as you've said, has been Bouchier, who scored 43 not out in the first match and then 71 on Sunday, and a properly good 71 as well. There were shots all around the wicket, pretty aggressive but not recklessly so. She did really good. And that's kind of created another issue for England, where coming into this series it was almost billed as a shootout between Tammy Beaumont and Sophia Dunkley to get the second opening spot when Danny Wyatt comes back. But neither of those 2 have properly kind of claimed that spot as of yet. So having come into the series probably behind both of them, Bouchier is now potentially leapfrogged at least one of them. Sophia Dunkley got run out, I think, in the first over of the game on Sunday. And Tammy Beaumont, she scored 30 odd, but before that hadn't kind of capitalised on the starts that she'd made. But away from Bouchier, that bench strength has been pretty shaky for a while. So it kind of feeds into this pattern which we saw against Sri Lanka in the summer and then into India over the winter, that when key players are unavailable, those backup players really struggle to make that translation up to international level. And I think it's since October 2022 that outside of those players missing in New Zealand and Knight, only 3 players, plus now Tammy Beaumont, have made scores of more than 25 in T20Is for England. One of those is Dunkley, and with question marks over her place in the side as well, we know about that. And then one of them is Amy Jones, then you've got Bouchier and now Tammy Beaumont. So it kind of shows that over the last few years, only really Alice Capsey has managed to properly integrate herself into that England first choice side of the players who are coming through. And not really being able to draw upon a wide pool of players with sufficient international experience and enough bank of performances going into a World Cup later this year in Bangladesh, where bouts of sickness are pretty common, along with injuries from increased workloads and that kind of thing. So it's starting to become slightly worrying. Also, a lot of those core of players, aside from Capsey, are in their early 30s and pretty similar ages. So if you look to the future, potentially losing a bunch of players at the same time when they retire, that's kind of a problem that's going to be down the road. And if it can't be fixed over the next few years, that's going to create more problems. So yeah, it was a pretty worrying collapse. And it speaks a lot to the issues that England are trying to fix at the minute outside the core of their side, because they are, when they've got their players, as we saw when they won the Ashes last year, they are a really, really good side when they've got all their players available. But that's kind of not filtering down into the players coming through at the minute.
Yeah, I suppose it's, especially if you look at that collapse, it's not an ability issue. It's that was an opportunity for quite a few players, some of whom are pretty experienced actually, to win a game that was there to be won. And quite a few players just didn't take that opportunity, and there were quite a few opportunities given. Ben, I wanted to ask you, what do you think that England top 3 will be come the World Cup? Because I was looking at highest scores by English top 3 batters in the last couple of years in T20I cricket, and the top 2 are Danny Wyatt, and the only other score over 61 by an England top 3 batter in the last 2 years is Bouchier's 71, and it was I thought it was such a good knock that is the sort of performance that gets someone into a team, even though she's batted a lot lower down the order for England over the last few years and hasn't done an awful lot, but it's a sort of knock that I think can change plans.
Yeah, and I guess because we're talking about this shootout between Dunkley and Beaumont, but what, like, Bouchier could maybe just slot into that top 3, maybe not the opening spot, and then, I mean, you say that stat about high scores. I think Capsey she's done decently enough. She'll want to start, defining games, but she's a good T20 player. She's she's done well for a player who's still in her career. So maybe at this stage you're looking at maybe Wyatt, Capsey, Bouchier, and it'll be interesting to see how much they choose to give the likes of Beaumont and Dunkley and others a go once the WPL lot are back, because maybe they'll sort of see how it goes in the 40-20, go back to full strength, check that team's working okay, and then if they win that, which it's no given, it's a very good New Zealand team, but if they do win that, then they have a chance for experimentation. But then equally, not loads of time to have their first choice team playing together, and you've got 2 games against good opposition in away conditions. That's a good test for a team as well. So maybe they will just want to go to who that'll be. So it'll just be interesting to see those what they pick in those teams. And I think one thing, just a note of positivity, like we sort of just, because Knight has been such a stalwart for England such a long time, we sort of just kind of wave away those runs as like, well, Knight made runs, but we know she could do that. But actually, there had been a fair few questions over her in T20I cricket, because she had not a great record, but also a spectacularly lopsided one. So she made the 50 in the second T20I, was her 3rd consecutive T20I 50. And those were her only 3 T20I 50s that have come outside of Canberra, where she's passed 50 5 times. So it's good that she's kind of ticked that off, but just that's an oddity, but it's just good that she is in some sort of form. And there is worry about the fringe players, there's worry about the future. But for a T20 World Cup, you need a bit of luck. You need your best players fit in form. And when you look at what that could now look like, Wyatt, Capsey, Bouchier, I guess, Knight, Siva Brunt, if a couple of those click, then you're not far off having a sort of a tournament-winning top 5, I think.
I'm trying to think of what the equivalent of Heather Knight's record is with the Ollie Pope stat of scoring hundreds north of the Oval.
Yeah, true.
So that means Heather Knight has only scored 1 T20I 50 north of Canberra. I think that must be the case. Anyway, Katya, any other learnings from England from this series? I thought Gibson was quite impressive with the ball in the 3rd game.
Yeah, she bowled a really good final over in the New Zealand innings, conceded only 4 singles off it, I think. So with the ball, that's been pretty good. Holly Armitage made her England debut on Sunday as a concussion replacement for Sarah Glenn. So that's kind of interesting. Got out in the last over for 1 off 1 ball. So yeah, that's interesting. Lindsay Smith also playing her first T20 since 2019. Got a wicket with her first ball back in the 2nd T20I. So that was pretty nice to see. But when the core players come back, which we expect to happen for the next game, which is on Tuesday overnight into Wednesday, that will be interesting to see how that goes, who misses out and who kind of comes in. So yeah, that will be pretty interesting.
Yeah, definitely really interesting to see how England go there. The IPL has started. It's been a busy few days with a couple of double game days in there as well. It was a good weekend for English batters. Sam Curran and Liam Livingstone, who we talked about on last week's show, got Punjab over the line. Curran, it was quite interesting. He batted at 4 and scored 60 odd, and it was his highest ever T20 score outside of an English domestic game, and he only bowled 1 over in that game as well. So a proper change of role for him. I think Livingston finished on 38 off 21 or 22 balls. And then Phil Salt scored a half century on KKR debut, who obviously came in as a late replacement for Jason Roy. It's his 3rd IPL 50 in just 10 games. So early days, but he's building up a pretty impressive IPL record. And I thought with all 3 of these innings, there was real match situation awareness in all 3 of them. And Katya, particularly interesting, I think, with Phil Salt, because he's got this reputation as a big power play basher. And I know we've talked about him on recent weeks in the show and how he really values playing red ball cricket, not just in itself, but also how it helps him in T20 cricket. This was a different type of impressive Phil Salt innings.
Yeah. So KKR, he was opening KKR and they lost 3 wickets in the power play, and they were 43 for 3. And ordinarily, when you think about Phil Salt, you think he'd try and attempt a big shot to try and break the shackles and potentially also get out when doing that. But he actually sat back and didn't score a boundary for ages and rebuilt and let the players at the other end take the aggression. So it was a real different kind of Phil Salt innings from what we've been used to. But I think if you look at what he's done in T20I cricket over the last kind of few months, it's kind of been brewing for a while that there is this kind of I guess not change, but maybe maturing of the way he's
Mm.
approaching T20 innings. We saw those back-to-back hundreds in the Caribbean. And he's also been pretty consistent in T20 cricket throughout the last few months, which is also a development. So yeah, it was a really good innings. And although like Russell came in and was so good at the end, a lot of the credit should go to Phil Salt for getting them into the position where they were then able to go on and win the match. Rather than Russell kind of doing what Russell does. It's also interesting that Phil Salt had a pretty average to poor SA20. So coming off the back of that and then straight into the IPL and playing that kind of innings, I think that's really positive to where he is as a T20 cricketer and a T20 opener as well.
No, KKR are quite an interesting side, so they really value their finishes. So Rinku Singh's entrance was delayed, as was Andrew Russell, batted at number 8. And a big reason, as you say, Katya, as why KKR did so well there was Salt made sure that those guys didn't come in too early. And Ben, the Andre Russell innings was spectacular. It was proper throwback to 2019 stuff when he was probably the best T20 player in the world. I think he scored 64 off 25. He is in spectacular form, and West Indies are, whisper it, looking pretty good for this T20 World Cup on home soil, because they haven't really troubled the top teams at the recent T20 World Cups. But now it feels like a lot of their best players are hitting pretty good form at the right time.
Yeah, and I was struck with this as well in that T20 series they played against England when they beat England at the end of last year, and just how much it meant to all the players. Like England can kind of treat bilateral cricket like almost like training games at times. They come out and they say, we excused our process as well, but it didn't quite come off and that sort of thing. And it can kind of seem like it doesn't really matter. And then it gets to a big tournament and they forget how to kind of win games that matter sometimes. At least that's how it seemed a bit at the World Cup. Whereas West Indies, that felt like a proper statement performance. I think it was Russ at the end of that saying about how important that series would have felt to him. And it does feel like there's maybe something building there. I mean, I guess it'll be interesting from that point of view to see how Shai Hope goes as well, because it was surprising to see him get picked up in the auction. Even more surprising that he then gets a game. And you're looking at that thinking, how have Delhi kind of let Phil Salt go, and they've got Shai Hope in there as one of their overseas batters? That feels like a bit of a failure of squad construction. But he's really talented, and if he, there's no better place to learn, I guess, in the IPL. And so that'll be another just interesting thing to keep an eye on, because you often see these overseas players like, oh well, that's never going to happen, and then it does. You're like, okay, that's fun kind of thing. But yeah, no, they'll be contenders, and what a huge thing that would kind of be for cricket in the region. We talked about that amazing Test win at the Gabba a few months ago, but in some ways, from a transformative effect, a World Cup win like on home soil, with all those kind of recognisable players and those kind of famous faces who are still famous faces in the region, that would be maybe as big a thing, possibly, even if for us cricket tragics, it would feel a bit different, I guess.
No, definitely that's a fair point. There's a new regulation in the IPL this year. Bowlers are allowed to bowl 2 balls above shoulder height per over. From the initial pieces of action, it looks like this is a tactic that some teams are going to really try to exploit. Ben, what do you think of the new regulation?
Yeah, I mean, I think overall I quite like it, and I think I like just having little tweaks, especially in a tournament, seeing how they work and how they affect the game overall. I think one thing that was perhaps a bit surprising from the early games is that actually it's not necessarily just like an absolute banker that you bowl your 2 bouncers and you get away with those 2 in and over kind of things. So actually part of maybe the reason why the 1 bouncer over was such an effective weapon before was because it came as more of a surprise, whereas now if it's 2 out of 6 balls to 1 out of 3, batters are kind of having to expect it and prepare for it a bit more. Like if a third of your balls you face from quicks, and if you can't put the short ball, that means the 30 balls you face from quicks you're going to struggle against, and probably more if you get targeted. And so batters are going to have to find a way to deal with it. But that means they are actually finding that way, and sometimes you can see that it's a bit more telegraphed. I think, but Bumrah actually, there was one moment when he executed it really well, because he saw kind of you could. It was the classic always Test match thing of setting the field for it and then going with the length ball rather than with the bounce ball. So it'll just be interesting to see how it pans out. I'm more of a fan of this than I was of the impact player to begin with. And I guess I'm sort of used to that now, but I'm sort of the biggest fan of it, I think. But yeah, it's nice to have these sort of innovations. And
I think new things in favour of the bowlers is a good thing to try, even if it only lasts a year. I'm sort of in favour. The one thing I sort of thought watching it in one of the games was it feels like fielding captains could go more all in with the fields for it. So I think so far you very much have similar feels to how you used to have in T20 cricket when you only have one short ball per over. But now it sort of feels if you can have two, and also it's more than two short balls, right? It's two balls between shoulder and head height. So actually, if you execute it well, it can still be 3 or 4 short deliveries and over. I sort of feel like you might as well just go more all in with the fields, which would be a development that I think would be fresh and interesting to watch.
Get Neil Wagner an IPL contract. Yeah.
Exactly. There's a bit of booing when Hardik Pandya made his return to Gujarat. He's obviously moved back to Mumbai. Is this one of those things where we say we don't like to see it, but actually like to see it?
Yeah, and I don't even think. I mean, there's a difference between booing and between proper crowd abuse or other things that are more unsavoury. Like, I think it's just part of like a bit of pantomime fun, but there was a bit of genuine feeling behind it. And firstly, from just a basic sporting point of view, like, why shouldn't there be in any other sport where this kind of transfer were to happen, where you come to a club, the club that's just formed, you're their captain for 2 years, and then as soon as a better offer comes along, you're like, see ya, thanks, bye, thanks for the leg up, and then you go somewhere else. That's the kind of thing that would create bad feeling anywhere, even if it's an understandable thing to do from Hardik Pandya's point of view. And it's also, I just thought it was encouraging because if the IPL is to, be most of the cricket that we're watching at some point in the future, then it's going to be good to feel that the fans really actually care about it. And that, I think that has been a bit in doubt in times, that it's been, fans are there for players. Like if you're going to, if you're a KPR fan going to Eden Gardens to watch UVRCB, are the crowds still, going to be really excited to see Kohli back? You kind of hope that they shouldn't be in some ways, they want to, maybe begrudgingly, but they would also want to see him get out for their team to win. It hasn't felt that way so much, but this was actually one of like the most stark times I can think of that it's really felt like a fan has like a crowd has ganged up on a player like that. And I think that is in a weird way sort of encouraging. That was just a great game as well, and Hardik was just at the centre of all of it. Took the new ball, him and Luke Wood pushed Bumrah to first change, and then he came out with he needed to hit 90 off the last over, go 6 and 4, and you're like, this is going to be the Hardik Pandya story. And then Umesh Yadav just held his nerves. That was a great game. Probably the pick of the game so far, but a good start.
Moving to Pakistan, predictably chaotic week or so for Pakistan, Ben, but one that actually might be quite exciting for them. They've got a new chair who isn't messing about. Imad Wasim's back, Mohammad Amir's back. 2 possibly quite important additions to their T20 World Cup squad. We talked about Imad Wasim last week. He had a brilliant PSL, and there isn't really anyone who does what he does as well as he does in Pakistani T20 cricket. Mohammad Amir is probably more interesting in that I don't think people have been talking about his return as much, but actually he quietly had a pretty good PSL himself.
Yeah, and he's been, if you go purely based on just numbers in T20 cricket since he retired from T20Is, he's basically got very similar numbers to Shaheen and Nazim Shah. So Shaheen and Amir both averaging 22, 20, 23 and a half, or Nazim averaging a bit higher. Economies are all between 7.4 and 7.8. So like those are all excellent numbers, and there's not a huge difference between Amir and the other two. And then also in the CPL, Amir's numbers have been even better. So he's averaging like less than 15 there, going at under 6.5 and over. And that's where obviously a lot of the T20 World Cup will be played. So from that point of view, it's canny. You just wonder how he's going to actually fit in because, right now, Shaheen is the captain. That was one of the other things the chair said, was that they would come to a decision on that, didn't give him his full backing in any way. So we'll see if he is still the captain come the New Zealand series next month. And you'd think it would be, either they pick all 4, but then you're like, who takes the new ball? Can one of them do a job outside of the new ball? Because they are all just new ball bowlers. That's been their main job. Or you pick
Harris
2
Ralph's
out of 3.
Harris Ralph's not. Harris Ralph.
No, sorry, but you'd have to pick, if you pick all 4, yes, then you'd have to pick 2 of the 3 to take the new ball of Amir, Shaheen and Azim. And then you'd think it would be Shaheen versus Amir if they have to go with 2 of them, because they're both left armers. And then you think, well, Shaheen is, he's Shaheen. He's Pakistan's, great all-format bowler of the modern era. But then you just wonder with that captaincy thing, is that position of his slightly weakening? And maybe, and also would Amir be content coming back? He cited positive discussions with the PCB, and he actually turned down discussions at the end of last year. So something must have quite significantly changed between those two times. Would he be coming back if it weren't for some sort of assurances that he would, he'd be getting a lot of game time? Maybe the assurance is just that you'll get a fair crack. They've got 9 T20Is, I think, between now and the World Cup. So it might be that, you'll get to play in a fair few of those and make your case, rather than you will definitely start. But that's quite interesting, I think, because because the idea of a Pakistan first choice 11 without Shaheen in it is kind of inconceivable, and yet not perhaps that unlikely. I don't know.
I couldn't believe that Mohammed Amir is still only 31, so he is 4 years younger than Chris Woakes, which obviously he's been around for a long time. And finally, Ben, Lytton Das produced one of the great pieces of Test cricket this week. Talk us through it.
Yeah, well, the clearest analogue is Brad Haddin when Australia were bowled out for 47 by South Africa, and in the middle of that collapse, he comes down the track, tries to smash, I think Dale Steyn, maybe Vernon Philander, into the stands, gets an edge through to the keeper. Lytton Das comes out first ball with Bangladesh 4 down early on, chasing 500, and again comes down the track, has a kind of wild swing, doesn't get an edge through to the keeper, she gets a top edge that goes miles in the air. Angelo Matthews settles under it. People are calling it the worst shot in cricket history. Bangladesh ended up subsiding quite poorly, really, in a game where they had Sri Lanka 5 down earlier on in both innings, and then twin centuries from Dalanjaya de Silva and Kamindu Mendis, only the third time in Test history two bats on the same side have done that. So quite a fun game, and actually interesting to watch, even though it was eventually a thrashing for Sri Lanka, I guess.
And as you mentioned before the show, Kamindu Mendis has got this ridiculous first-class record, so he's someone to keep an eye on in the future. Anyway, let's head to Phil to hear him on the latest Wisden Cricket Monthly that comes out this week. Phil, there's a new magazine out this week. What's in it?
Well, the County Championship, as you might have heard, it's back for its latest iteration, and Joe Harmon, as he does every year annually, gives the full overview of all 18 counties, your ins and outs, your breakout players, your bolters. He predicts how they're going to fall. Sometimes he's a bit right. Sometimes he's a lot right. He's picked out all the stories that he thinks is going to play out across the county, across the shires for this year. It's a county championship heavy piece, and probably typified by having Mel Farrell interview Shan Masood, who we mentioned on the show briefly last week. He's got the wildest and toughest job in cricket, without a shadow of a doubt. You think that captaining Pakistan would be relatively onerous, but then you throw Yorkshire into the mix as well. It's lucky that he has a brain the size of Yorkshire in order to be able to pull this thing off. Mel's done one of her best interviews. She always brings through these heavy duty names. She always does a sterling job, but this is particularly fascinating. We gave it more coverage more space in the magazine than we would normally for this particular feature, because he speaks so powerfully. He really does beat for the game. His heart beats for the game, and his mind, it does as well. And Mel's done a great job on that one. Meanwhile, we have tried to predict our own winners of the Champo, and it's basically Surrey and anyone else.
Who did you go for?
Well, the thing is, it's a fool's errand anyway, arguing against Surrey when they have about 17 international quality seamers all sitting on the bench at any one time. So their depth is incomparable, really, to anyone else. But looking past them, I fancy Hampshire. I think they've been very close for the last 3 years, finishing the top 3. I quite fancy them. I think Durham are an interesting unknown quantity.
You don't have to go that far back for teams to get promoted and do really, really well in Div 1, and they completely dominated Div 2 last year. Well,
exactly that. And I think it was Essex who won it in 2017, having come up. that year. It's certainly not impossible. They are going to win a lot of games. The question is, do they have the depth? I think one or two others. I don't really see Essex bothering the top echelons this time round, although John Stern, our editor at large, he did plump for Essex, which just, again, shows you how fascinating this top division is, because it's very hard to predict, really. We've not had a team like Surrey in a long time, though, have we? A team that is on paper clearly the most powerful club in the country, and with Alex Stewart stepping away at the end of the year. His wife has been battling cancer now for a number of years, and he wants to spend more time with his family, but he leaves an extraordinary legacy there, obviously, and they are obsessing over what they call the three-peat. It's a phrase that you're going to hear more and more of, I'm afraid, folks. And this is what is driving them here. They've won 2 in a row. They're expecting to pick up a third. But yeah, this is the Champo. It's great fun. No one ever knows. How do you see it? How do you see it?
How do I see it? I actually just looked at what I wrote last year, and I sort of hedged my bets and eventually said Surrey. As you say, they've got probably the most depth in the seam bowling department. You know, they go about it very differently to how when they won the titles in the early 2000s, they had a very much a star-studded 11, whereas now they just have loads of really good seamers who will play lots, which is probably the most important component of putting together a championship winning side. I think as long as Essex have Messrs Harmer, Cook and Porter, I think they are always in with a shout. They've recruited very cannily this winter, getting in Dean Elgar and Jordan Cox replacing Alistair Cook and Dan Lawrence. That's pretty much as good as you can get in the transfer market. Hampshire are really interesting. They've come close, as you say. I'm fascinated by the progress of John Turner. He's played one game of cricket since England picked him 8-9 months ago now. People are very excited about him. But Hampshire...
The question is runs at Hampshire. No one really stood up last year. Vince made good runs, but not enough support around him. Fletcher Middleton's a very interesting opening bat, and they've bought Ali Orr in from Sussex as well as a top order player. If they can find one of, and Nick Gumbs is a good player as well, if they can find one of those or two of those to make 1,000 plus, then I think they are well in the mix. But again, you know, we haven't even mentioned Lancashire. We've just spoken to Keaton Jennings. You know, they've got the best spinner of the best off spinner of the century, or one of the two best spinners of the century, who could do a mushtaq, could win it on his own. If they're in touching distance going into September with 4 games, he could win it on his own. So it's great stuff. I love it. I really do. It's my favourite tournament.
So, something we didn't actually delve into that much with Keaton was, and he mentioned it a couple of times, actually they really struggled winning games last year. So they only lost once in the championship, but I think they only won 3 times. So Lyon could be a totally transformative signing for them. And as you say, Durham, I'm very interested to see how they go this season. I think it'll be a really, really competitive Div 1 this year, as it often is. What else is in the magazine?
I interviewed Jimmy Adams and gave you that taster of that interview. So he's defining moments of his career, going back to that incredible story about Lara, and Rob Smythe, who is a newish recruit for us, well known to readers of the Guardian, brilliant writer, journalist, lovely light touch, but he knows his stuff inside out. He's also obsessional by nature, and so when he came to me with an idea to essentially drill down further into the details of the stats of the last 30, 40 years, and even going back further than anyone has ever tried to do before, I thought this would be perfect. His first piece was an absolute triumph, and his second is spectacular as well. He looks at the batters of the 90s and keeping it only to the 90s, and there's obviously 3 monuments in there: Waugh, Tendulkar and Lara, and he's compared their records, but not just the simple numbers, but the context of those numbers, when those innings were played, what the games that they won, the games that they saved, the runs they made in difficult conditions away from home, and so on. And he's compared them and contrasted them. It's a fascinating piece. But just before I move on from that, there's one mention to Graham Gooch, who is the other totem of that era, of that decade, even though he played his last game in 1995. So Gooch's record in itself is comparable to those 3. Although, as I say, he only played half that decade. He was 42, I think, by the time he walked away in 95. So So cracking piece by Rob Smythe and backed up by Jim Wallace as well, who's done a lovely number on Lara's 375. Wisden India editor Adia Sharma, who's increasingly one of my favourite writers out there. He's done another really excellent piece looking behind the curtain of the IPL and what it means, what it will look like in the next period of time as well, the next 2, 3, 4 years. We talked about it last week, but there's a sense of moving away from the grand icons of it to a different era with a slightly different complexion. And yeah, he's in really good form, is Adia, at the moment. And other things as well. John Stern on Test cricket's all-time greatest upsets in light of, say, Brisbane and arguably Hyderabad as well. Mark Ramprakash on Jimmy Anderson, who you might have heard of. He's taken 700 Test wickets. It's impressive, isn't it? And Stephen Chalk, who's a fabulous writer. He's written numerous books. He'll be known to cricket people. He's a beautiful writer, and he's done a touching and powerful tribute to Mike Proctor, of course, who passed away last month. So all of that goes into it. Yeah. And then we have the front cover and the main story.
I was gonna ask. This is genuinely one of my favourite covers. Well, hopefully this is one for the YouTube audience. We'll pop the cover on now. Quite a brave story, I think, and an important one to tell. Do you want to talk through what the cover is and why and how you covered it as well? Because I think that is as interesting as the why.
Okay. So the cover is Shoaib Bashir and Rayan Ahmed. They are 40 years old between them. They've been professional cricketers for 5 minutes. And yeah, there they were in the pressure cooker of the hardest place to play cricket in the world, standing up, getting stronger, getting better minute by minute, holding their own and doing some really seriously impressive things in an England shirt. And so the piece is in large part about them and in large part as well about Tom Hartley and how England have almost by accident discovered 3 potential Test match quality spinners here. But unashamedly, there's something about Bashir and Rayan Ahmed that I couldn't take my eyes off when I was watching that series. 2 young British Asian lads, South Asian lads, just stepping out in their careers, doing brilliant things in an England shirt at the same time as, you know, living over here, living in England, living in Britain at the moment. It was hard to shake the sense of our political class disgracing itself, frankly, driving these kinds of conversations into the gutter, weaponizing these kinds of conversations to sow seeds of discord and division. And much of this is sweeping across the country. And I couldn't shake the mad dichotomy of seeing these 2 young, spunky, articulate, great sort of models of the positive elements of multiculturalism in this country with the horrors and the shit that was coming out of Westminster just up the road from where we work. And I couldn't separate the 2. And so I wanted to write about it, basically. And I wanted to set their stories in the context of the political moment, if you like, or the social moment.
And it's not just the moment as well. You know, you talk about how young those 2 guys are. I think you look at the England under-19 squad that went out to South Africa this year as well. The professional game, it's overdue, but is becoming more representative of the people who actually play cricket recreationally in the UK. There were, you know, a handful of British Asians in the England under-19 setup, and you'd probably wager that over the next 10 to 15 years, we're going to see more and more British Asians, not only in the professional county game, but also in the England side. So I think in terms of what the England side is going to look like, this is going to become the normal, I think. And you're right as well. You know, I'm a British Asian, and the coverage in the last few months is just different to before. Like hate speech is normalized at a level in supposedly public spheres that previously that sort of conversations which wouldn't be entertained at all. And you're seeing people who hold positions of power now saying stuff that it doesn't go unquestioned, but there's an element, people debate whether or not hate speech is fine in a way that people just all said wasn't fine not that long ago. So that context, I think it's important. I think it's important, and I think it's something that should be delved into. And this wasn't just your own musings on it. You got probably the most qualified person in English cricket to share his thoughts in a way that I don't think he's actually shared in as firm a way as he did with you.
Well, Moeen Ali wanted to talk about this because he's been there himself. And when I dropped him a message, and I was quite clear about what I was wanting to try and write, he wanted to contribute to it because, as he said to me, when himself and Adil were playing and prominently playing for England, he felt they were always representing more than simply themselves. They were representing more than simply the South Asian and Muslim community as well. They were trying to generate a message that transcended bats and balls and wins and losses. And he came to value and recognize the platform that he was given, and Adil came to feel the same. And yet he says to me, quote, as a society in general, we're not in a great place. That Muslims are treated appallingly in the media in particular. And as you described, this has become normalized now. And he speaks very beautifully, actually, and very powerfully about it. He's quite understated, as you know. He doesn't do it for headlines, but this was something that he wanted to talk about in the context of this positive vision of an alternative way of understanding what modern Britain can be. And it typified by these two young lads, I felt. Without wanting to overplay the point, the simple reality is that between Test matches 2 and 3, the former Home Secretary declared that we were now living in an Islamic state. The former Deputy Chair of the current government declared that the Mayor of London, who's a Muslim, had been taken over by Islamists. This is the backdrop. And these stories are not in the bowels of the internet. These stories are on the front page of establishment newspapers. Establishment newspapers, incidentally, that also foreground cricket. There's a mad dichotomy there. They will stick those stories on one page, and then in their sports pages, they'll stick a photo of Rayan Ahmed or Shoaib Bashir on the front page because they've taken a few wickets the day before. It's almost like irony just keeled over and died, and nobody noticed. So this is what I wanted to write. Now, look, I want to just finally make the point on it that these two lads don't need this, and these two lads don't need to read this, and they don't need to be put into this position of being figureheads or anything like that. You fall in love with it with your passion, and you get to that level. You don't need all the rest of it. They've got enough on their plate. But we need it. We need it. And we need to talk about these things, and we need to confront these things.
An important and timely piece, I think. The County Preview magazine is always a particularly good one to get. If you want to get your hands on the magazine, head to the link that we've left in the description for the show. Cool. That is everything for today's show. Thanks, Katya. Thanks, Ben. Cheers, listeners. We'll be back for more next week.